Welcome to the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership Podcast. Subscribe now so you don't miss a drop of straight talk you can't get anywhere else. We discuss the whiskeys to drink, music to listen to, and what it really takes to be an effective leader. I'm your host, Galen Bingham, the leadership strategist. Tonight's guest, global negotiation strategist and partner of the GAP Partnership, Scott Chepow. Hey, what you drinking? Let's talk about how challenging that might have been the first time, because like I said, very often that's hard to give up. We talked about self-awareness earlier, and for me, it's often ego comes into play, where I want to show these young kids how it's done. And yeah, you might get some results immediately, but you're robbing your team of that experience. You're robbing yourself of the ability to do things at the level that you were just talking about, or only you can do. But yet it's so hard to step away from that thing that you enjoy so much. Was that a challenge for you in the beginning, or did you just recognize that's what you needed to do in order to grow the practice?
No, I didn't recognize it at first. We're a 25-year-old company that continues to grow. And when I first took over a team within the business, the team was small. It was lesser in tenure with the organization. So I had to build up their own capabilities so that I could step back and out of the scenes. For me, I believe very firmly in empowering the team. Everyone talks about situational leadership. Sometimes it's easy and you get to empower the team. Sometimes people need more direction. I've been blessed with a team at the GAP Partnership that is very, very easily delegatable. It's not even a word, very easy to delegate to. And that team has been able to take over and do the things they need to do to make our clients successful. And more importantly, to make themselves successful.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Now you're probably at a level where I can imagine that you've got managers who are managing people underneath you. Is that the case? I mean, I don't know how flat the organization is, but I'm sure you got leaders underneath you.
So our structure is a bit different, but yes, we have people who lead our teams of consultants. I actually sit off a bit to the side these days and manage some of our more global, more strategic clients. So I don't have a broad team, but I have in the past.
Gotcha. And so I was just wondering, how often do you see people who are reluctant to let go of that expertise and they play in the game a little longer than maybe they should? They can still add value, but they really, I had a mentor at the Coca-Cola company, and he said most people don't understand the business they're in. Most people don't understand the business they're in, and when you become a leader of leaders, you're no longer in the business of adding value to the client. Your role, your job, your business is to create the environment so that your people can go add value to the client. And it sounds like that was something that a transition that you made, whether it was easy or not, but because you made that transition, that has really contributed to your success. And I'm wondering if you ever see people who are struggling with that transition.
I think it's not just in my current employer. I mean, this happens all across the world. You have the folks that like to do and the folks that like to lead. And to be fair, sometimes the people that like to do should be leading, and sometimes the people that like to lead should be doing. But when you look at folks across organizations, we need to empower people to do the best they can, to be the best, whatever they're trying to be. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes the fit isn't quite right. But if we give them the leeway, the latitude to grow, they will usually understand this is for me, this isn't for me. We often have found that everyone wants to sit there and run a big project for a client. Oftentimes, when they finish that, they realize, man, that was exhausting. There was a lot of wrangling cats, and at the end of that, they say, man, maybe this wasn't what I want to do. Maybe there's something over here that I want to do. but they will never know, and you will never know as a leader until you empower them to do so.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Great. All right. So let's go back. Let's go back to some of the elements of negotiation that, again, your face shows up every time I get ready for a negotiation. One of the things that you in particular taught me is that things very rarely are as they appear to be. And if I'm naive enough to think that things are exactly the way I'm seeing them, then chances are I am being led down a road that I really don't want to be on. Talk a little bit about that, because very often, especially in corporate, in big corporate complex negotiations that I've been in, I've worked for companies who had a very high partnership disposition. And so we often want to think that our client has as high of a client disposition as we do. So if I'm going to be upfront, then they're going to be upfront, is what we think. If I'm going to be forthright, well, then they're going to be forthright, is what we think. And you really opened my eyes during one of those activities where you were like, Galen, what did I ever do up until this point to make you think you should trust me in this role play? And I think about that all the time. And I was putting into you, I was projecting onto you what I was feeling. I wanted to be upfront. Therefore, Scott must be upfront. And that was just a lesson that you made me pay for in that role play. You made me pay for it. Talk a little bit about how often that occurs with negotiations, where we project onto the other party our desires as opposed to seeing things the way that we probably should.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said, Gail, and I'm going to try and take it piece by piece. But the reality is, there's 14 behaviors of a negotiator, and there's two of them that are particularly paramount in what you just said. Behavior number 11, which is creates and maintains the appropriate climate for trust. When we look at buyers versus sellers, so whenever someone comes to a workshop with the Gap Partnership, we have them do a negotiation profiler and to understand their own self-awareness of those 14 behaviors. It asks them 70 questions, and it gives them a spider graph to understand their own perspective on that. We have the ability as an organization to query the entire database. And we do that from time to time, and we separate out buyers from sellers. And what we see when we look at the 14 behaviors is we see sellers skew towards being more collaborative and more partnership oriented. We see buyers skew towards being more distributive and more transactional in nature. What ends up happening is the seller tends to create an inappropriate climate for trust because they think there's more trust needed than there really is in the conversation. And B, it leads to a perspective and a perception that there's an imbalance in the power dynamic. And that's not necessarily true. What is true is that the buyers and sellers are taking a different approach to that negotiation. And the more you understand the way the buyer's approaching it, or the seller's approaching it, the better off you'll be in that negotiation. Now, I alluded to there's two behaviors that are particularly paramount. The other one is behavior number 6, which is listens and interprets the meaning behind the words. When you sit back and you think about what someone is saying to you and what they're doing throughout the conversation, you can get below the surface of the conversation, and you can get into what their counterparty is thinking and what they're feeling, which means you can start to understand their pressures and you can start to understand their priorities. Once you've done that, you can start to structure a deal that makes sense to the other party. But you have to step back from the negotiation, from the conversation, delve deep into what they're saying and what they're doing to take that perspective, which means you need to take your time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Take your time. One of the things I had a conversation with Mr. John Sadam, long time colleague at the Coca-Cola Company, Undoubtedly, you've probably spent some time with him, either consulting on some negotiation or training. He's brilliant. And one of the things that he talked about in his episode was that the degree to which you can, you always want to take your time. Very few things that are good come out of feeling rushed. That sounds like Scott. That sounds like something I could have gotten from you. One of the things I remember is how, I forget what you called it, but how you can use time to try to speed up what the other person may do. And there are some things that you can do to try to get someone to behave in a way that they wouldn't ordinarily. Talk about those triggers you can use, those tactics that you can use, not individually, but just the purpose of tactics in a negotiation.
So first, you said something that sparked some interest in me. I believe it's the Navy SEALs that have the quote that says "slow is fast, fast is slow." But the reality is, there's lots of different things you can do to speed a negotiation along and to put pressure on the other party. People generally use negotiation tactics as a way to shift the balance of power. But is that the appropriate response? It needs to be appropriate to the situation, your given set of circumstances. So before you employ a negotiation tactic, think that through. Think
Mm.
through what you want the outcome to be, and as well, what you want the relationship to be on the backside of that. When you think about the tactics you employ, tactics can have a tendency to disrupt the relationship and then dismantle the basis for trust. If you are planning for that and you know you're going to use a negotiation tactic that can have that tendency, well, you need to step back and think to yourself, how am I going to repair the relationship? And how am I going to repair trust when I inevitably damage it on the backside?
Wow. One of the things that I've noticed is you've used the word trust maybe 20 times in the time that we've been talking already. How critical is trust in almost any kind of a negotiation?
That's a fantastic question, and it depends. It definitely depends. When we talk about different types of negotiations, there's four main factors which dictate which type of negotiation you're in: the level of dependency between the parties, the relationship, the length and strength, and of course, where do you want that aspirationally, the level of trust, and the degree of complexity. When you think about the level of trust, if you were to go to, as my wife and I did a few years ago, go to Morocco for a day. Yes, we went for a day. We bought some artwork there. We bought some my son's soccer jersey there. If you think about the level of trust that we needed to do so, it's pretty minimal. But if call it, as you alluded to, Coca-Cola, and you're dealing with one of the major retailers in the United States, Walmart, Kroger, and so on, well, you need a different basis for trust to spur that relationship to strategic partnership. Because if you go in a transactional nature, they're going to respond to you in a transactional nature.
Yeah, and you're either going to pay for it now or you're going to pay for it later. But trust me, you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it. I keep coming back to this feeling that I have that you have found your thing. This is no longer what you do. This is who you are. Help me with that. I mean, am I off? You seem to be having a whole lot more fun than anyone who has a job that I've ever seen.
Oh, wow, that is a loaded question and a half. That's absolutely true. I do enjoy my job. I enjoy the interactions I have with my clients. I enjoy the peers I have, the colleagues I have, because to be fair, we're a people business, and our team is amazing. I can't say enough good things about every single person within the organization. But for me, when I engage with the client, again, going back to all those personality profilers I've done over the years, everything says that I like to solve people's problems. And that is enjoyable to me. I did it before I joined the Gap partnership. I do it now. My role, I think my calling in life is to help people progress and solve their problems. So, if you were to ask my children, they might have a different story about that.
Okay, now we joked about this idea that this is commercial negotiations. This is not to be done with kids. This is not to be done in families. But I think that there's some truth to that. I mean, or are there some similarities though? Because one of the things that I recall possibly getting from you is that all of life is a negotiation. It's the question is whether or not you choose to participate.
Oh, wow. Yes. So there's definitely things that would apply, but you just have to be careful. If you were to act like you would, as I shared in going to Morocco for a day, if you were to act like you did in the souk in Tangier with your family, you'd be sleeping on the couch for quite some time if you made it to the couch.
Yeah, really. If you get to keep the couch. I'll tell you, I've made that trip to Tangiers, and that is a totally different experience. To set the scene, we walk into this big room. They've got all of these, people standing around. We were trying to buy carpets, and one of the guys comes over and says, "Oh, would you like something to drink? I've got some nice beverage here for you to drink." He offered me something to drink, and then he starts talking about how beautiful my wife is. Oh my gosh, your wife is so beautiful. Oh, you are a lucky man. You must have to fight all the time because your wife is so beautiful. And then we started negotiating for the rug. And it's like, I fully expected the way that he was setting the scene. I fully expected that we were the best of friends. And would you believe that I've owned that rug for a good 15 years now? He hasn't called once to check and see how well that rug fits into my home. I think he said that one of the rugs was knitted by his mother-in-law. He hasn't called once to see how well I was taking care of that rug. But I was getting reeled into this collaborative partnership, familial. And do you think was that by chance? Was that just his disposition, or do you think that was possibly planned?
Nothing happens by chance in negotiation. Uh, I'll tell you, so for me, my wife and I walked into what she would tell you was an art gallery, and I would tell you it was a hallway that sold art. My wife was looking at art pictures while I was sitting there playing on my phone. And my wife looked at me and said, "Scott, what do you think?" And before I could even get a word out of my mouth, the guy walked over and said, "It's 200 euro, but we haggle." To which my wife did, "You're on, it's your show." And I looked at him and said, 15. And my wife said, it's his life's work. What do you mean? I'm like, the guy said, it's 100. And my wife said, what just happened? And then we got to a point where we were at 40 euro. And he said, can you give me another 20 euro? And I said, no. And my wife said, you're being rude. You asked me a question. I just answered it. And we paid 40 euro. We're walking down the street, and my wife said, "How did you know?" And I said, "Well, yeah. While you were messing around looking at pictures, I was scrolling on my phone, looking up the average monthly income for a resident of the city of Tangier, and he just asked you for half of it." The aftermath of that story is I told my wife a while back, I'm like, I tell that story all the time. And she goes, "You do?" I'm like, "Yeah, whatever happened to that painting?" To which my wife looked at me, she goes, "You're an idiot." So what do you mean? She goes, it's been hanging in our dining room since we got back.
Oh my. I am positive you've got hundreds of stories like that. How much of your job or your role or what you do is around storytelling? Because as you said earlier, you could tell me that I've got this tell, or you can show me through a video, or you can tell a story that gets me to wonder, wow, I wonder if I do that. And I just love the way you told that story. How much of your work is storytelling, do you think?
Quite a bit. Quite a bit is talking about some similar situations and telling the story that goes behind them and how people were successful in navigating those negotiations. Sometimes it gets to be fun and exciting, like buying a picture in Morocco. Other times it's dealing with a large counterparty on the other side and how people were successful in dealing with it. Other times it's looking at a client saying, "Look, you would be better served to build, embrace, and implement a process into your negotiation so that everyone's moving and marching in the same direction."
Mm, wow. Wow, I love that. I love that. I'll tell you another revelation that I had. And again, at the time that you and I met, I think I don't know, I must have had 25 years in sales leadership, and, pretty big companies. And one of the things that you helped me to realize is that I would spend a good amount of time getting the internal approvals. I'd spend a great amount of time building my presentation. I might spend 15 minutes preparing for the negotiation on the way to the client while we're trying to drive to a location and I'm trying to scarf down a burger. And you just helped me realize during our time together how backward that was. Because just as in your example, most of the value in any negotiation is given up in your head. In that the guy said 25, you said 15, and he went to 100. So, how typical is it that salespeople will spend so much time trying to get deals approved internally, thinking about the sales pitch, and not thinking about the negotiation? How frequent is that? How common is that?
Wow, that is a tough one. So we did some internal research a while back. We dug through our old consulting projects that we've done, and we found that 58% of the time, people do not plan for the negotiation beyond objective setting. And if you
Mm,
think about that, and you think about how you're going to navigate the negotiation, how you're going to shape the negotiation, you've missed the entire point. Your objective may be something they could have given you anyways. So if you're thinking about strategically planning for the negotiation, it's got to take place earlier. It's got to be more interactive, and it's got to take more time. The piece on internal alignment that you alluded to, the number one cause of failure in negotiation is a lack of internal alignment.
mm,
Your point on getting internal approvals, that absolutely needs to be done. Then you need to think about how you're going to communicate internally as the negotiation unfolds to keep people off your back, for lack of a better term, and to keep people from pressing on your shoulder and saying, yeah, but we need this deal.
mm. Wow. This has been an incredible conversation, and you're taking me back to the time when we were sitting across the table from each other in a role play. But like I said, I think about how little I thought about negotiations on the front end, and how much even just the week after I was like so dialed in. And even today, some 10, I don't know, 10 years later, you're still in my head. How often do you hear from alumni? And I do recall that you gave us a lifetime guarantee, a lifetime access. How often do you hear from people that say, "Wow, I took your program back in 1918, in 2018, and I'm still thinking about some things that you shared, many years later."
Oh, all the time, all the time. I've got one client that, I've been with the Gap Partnership since 2015, and my contact within a client took our workshop in 2004 and still remembers everything. When we have those kind of interactions all the time with people, for me, I'm always conversing with folks. I'll often get phone calls from folks that have been on my workshop or known me for a few years and say, "Hey, I've got a challenge. You can always call me. Always call me. You can call me at 2 in the morning. I won't answer the phone. I guarantee
But you
that.
can
I'll
call.
call you back the next day."
Well, hey, man, I have absolutely enjoyed this conversation. My VIPs are going to love you. What are some things that you would want to share on this side of the velvet rope? How can people know if they are in an organization and they need to have you? Because a lot of people, I'm going to assume, are like myself in that you feel like negotiations is one of those things where you feel like you know what you're doing before you actually get exposed to what you've been giving away all these years. How can people identify when their organization is ready to work with Gap Partnership or someone like you?
That's a great question. So if you were to go to our website, gappartnership.com, there is actually something on there called the Negotiation Maturity Index. And it is an organizational assessment of how an organization thinks about negotiation. When we talk about negotiation maturity or negotiation culture, there's three main facets. It's the people, the process, and the organization. When you take a look at those and you think about what you need to develop, it's pretty clear cut when you evaluate yourself. And if you're truly self-critical and self-aware as an organization, when you need to give us a call.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, there you heard it. Boy, I tell you, I'm gonna keep you. If you've got a few more minutes, I'd love to keep you and bring you into the VIP room, because I want to get more into the specifics of how people can know when they are in a negotiation versus when they are selling, because that was one of the things that was really kind of a knock upside my head. I was in one of the role plays, I think with you, and you had some very specific things that, Galen, if you're doing this, you're selling. And if you're selling when you're supposed to be in negotiation, chances are you're losing. And it was just very, very eye opening. So I want to get into some of those details, but I'm not willing to give that away for free. So, man, I'll tell you, man, raise your glass, and let's cheers to the other side. Until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, it's not too late. Hit that subscribe button so you're sure to catch the next episode. If you're really enjoying the vibe, leave us a review or become a VIP for guest and show exclusives. Cheers.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.